welcome you to America's Roundtable, a weekend program from the nation's capital, focusing on the economy, liberty, and security. I am Joel Anand-Sami, joined by co-host Natasha Sardoj, co-founder of International Leaders Summit and former contributor to the Economist Intelligence Unit. We are pleased to have guest host Becky Norton Dunlop, Vice President at the Heritage Foundation and former director of the Ronald Reagan White House Cabinet. Thank you for joining us, Becky.
Well, thank you so much for having me on the program. It's always wonderful to be a guest host with you.
Wonderful indeed. And just as we were talking briefly prior to the recording of this program about the tragedy that affected so many lives in Colorado, it was really sad to see at a public venue like a theater where individuals were affected by this tragedy, and our hearts and our prayers are with those that lost loved ones. But also during this time here, we see the call for greater gun control and the concerns that many Americans have about the importance or the significance of individual Americans to bear arms. And we would very much appreciate your perspective on the Founding Fathers' specific call and stand on the right to bear arms.
I think this is a wonderful topic to discuss because the tragedy, as you mentioned, does elicit a very emotional response from people who like to use emotion to drive public policy away from common sense. And one of the great things we have in our country is the ability to look back and see what our founders gave us, recognizing the thinking that they had during the period of time when they were actually forming the new nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all are created equal. Of course, our Second Amendment of the Constitution talks about a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. And then it goes on to say the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And I think as we think back on that period of time, the founding of our country, the people who were able to own firearms and know how to use them recognized that that was a key element to being able to stand for liberty against an army of aggressors. In the instance of our founding, the British. And I believe that our founders knew very well that it was important for the future of the freedom of the nation that every individual should have this right to keep firearms to protect themselves and their families and their property.
That is so true, and I very much appreciate referring to the Heritage Guide to the Constitution, which is an excellent resource that you have presented so often, and the editing was done by Ed Meese, America's Attorney General. And the thought that was conveyed in this very important aspect is that how the founding generation truly mistrusted standing armies and was sort of a check to any form of force that could oppress individual citizens.
Yes, that's right. And of course, we have seen throughout history other despots in other parts of the world who've been able to either seize power in a country or maintain their power because the citizens had no way to defend themselves and their families or to stand up against the standing army of the oppressor.
Oh, that's a great point, Becky. In former Yugoslavia, what happened is that the military, practically before starting the war, the federal military withdrew all the weapons, all the firearms, all the guns from so-called militia. Practically, it was a military at the state level and civilians that had right, which were like a reservist, let's call them, to have arms as well. So first they withdrew all the arms and they freely attacked all the countries knowing that nobody will be able to protect themselves. So the point that you raised is a real issue that can happen and happened in the very near past in Balkans, former Yugoslavia.
Well, and I think that it's important for the people in the United States to keep these points in mind from a very rational, common sense standpoint when we have irrational discussions such as some of those that have followed this tragedy in Aurora. Obviously, we don't know what goes through the mind of someone who is acting in a deranged manner, whether he's in control of his faculties or not. What he did was essentially a domestic terrorist act. And we know, because we have seen it occur not only in this country but in other countries, criminals, bad guys who want to engage in illegal acts can come up with what they need to do to engage in those acts. It's not as though, you have a person who's a criminal saying, oh, well, I need to follow the law to get a gun. No, it's the citizenry who needs to make sure that they always have the right to have access to firearms and have possession of firearms so they can defend themselves against domestic terrorism, standing armies that are taking away freedoms, and in instances like the one we saw, people who are acting in a deranged, irrational manner.
Do you have any recommendation regarding the legal framework for having certain requirements, maybe stricter requirements, so that deranged persons, those that are not really acting and they are not normal, that they don't get in possession of arms?
Well, we have many laws already on the books here in the United States. In some instances, we have excessive laws that keep law-abiding people from acquiring the firearms that they want to, or in certain ways. People who want to get firearms illegally can do so. People who want to engage in illegal activities, obtain illegal goods, can do so. I mean, that happens, and it's not just with firearms. So it's not so much that we need more laws on the books. It's that we need to enforce the laws we currently have on the books, and we have to recognize that sometimes there are going to be instances where we have people engaging in these deranged activities, whether they're of sound mind or not. I don't want to prejudge his ability to be able to stand trial as a sane person for doing these horrific acts. But people who want to be able to carry firearms legally to protect themselves and their families should be encouraged to do so and should be able to do so. And our goal should be to make sure that the people in this country know what the laws are and then know how to own and use firearms safely.
In fact, Becky, as you've just mentioned about deranged individuals, those that are individuals that want to cause great harm to a civilian population, and as you've termed it right, a domestic terrorist. I think the case of Timothy McVeigh, whereby he had access to fertilizer, and it's the aspect that you cannot control the tools that are used, but certainly we as a community have the right to bear arms to certainly protect our loved ones and our individuals and ourselves from individuals that may want to cause harm.
That's right. The other thing we always need to keep in mind is there is evil in the world. Mm-hmm. You do not have to be deranged. You do not have to be a maniac. You can be of sound mind and you can be evil. Mm-hmm. And we have to encourage our citizens to stand for the rights that they have as free people to have what they need to protect themselves and their families.
Although this recent event spurred a debate again, the long-term trend is, when we're looking at Pew Research Center, they conducted polling in the end of July last, but looking at the trend line from 2000, it's a significant increase in those that protect the rights of Americans to own guns. So the right to bear arms has increased from 29% in 2000 to some 46% in 2012. While those that are for controlled gun ownership decreased from 66 in 2000 to some 47%. They're actually almost at the same level now. So people do understand the need, obviously, and there were some obviously conditions and events that shaped that public opinion, as well as the institutes that have had a role in it.
Well, I think that's exactly right. organizations like the National Rifle Association do a wonderful job of helping people understand how to use firearms safely and why people should be able to own them and how they can safeguard them. I think the American people have witnessed the fact that there have been instances in this country in different communities where someone with carrying a legal firearm could have actually stopped the number of people murdered in certain situations. I believe the American people have observed thugs and terrorists and dictators around the world coming to power and engaging in hostile activities against innocents. I believe the American people have observed thugs and terrorists and dictators around the world coming to power and engaging in hostile activities against innocents. And they recognized that people with legal firearms who knew how to handle them would be in a better position to save lives from such evil. And I think it is changing the way people think. And I think we need to commend the National Rifle Association and encourage people to learn about firearms, buy a safe to keep them in, and then learn how to handle them safely.
Indeed, Becky, I really appreciate your feedback in that response. And we've been somewhat troubled by the United Nations' recent activities and events that have taken place in New York. For example, the United Nations Arms Trade Treaty, known as ATT, has weighed in the discussions of imposing regulation or restrictions on the United States when it comes to the issues of the right to bear arms.
Yes, I think once again we see the United Nations bureaucracy, which seems to want to control the world, try to impose its will on countries that want to defend the rights of their citizens and, frankly, our constitutional rights. The UN is just, again, mistaken and wrong on this, and perhaps if they feel so strongly about this, they might just decide to move their headquarters to, let's say, Venezuela.
Well, interestingly enough, as we talk about the United Nations and look at what transpired in, say, the former Yugoslavia, where its inaction led to the slaughter of 250,000 people, and as we look at what is even transpiring in Syria, just last week we had Matthew Kaminsky, who gave us an update. He serves on the Wall Street Journal's editorial board about the unfortunate engagement of the United Nations in actually causing greater harm rather than providing solutions to the issues at hand. And with the United Nations involved in closed meetings, I think that certainly raises even greater concern about what it is doing behind closed doors in trying to encroach on American citizens' rights.
Yes, exactly. We have a scholar, Ted Broman, who has been monitoring all this at the UN, and people who are interested in his perspective can, check his blog at heritage.org, The Foundry, or actually contact him. He'll be writing more papers on this, but one of the points that he makes that I think is very important for the American citizens to really understand very clearly, and that is that no external power, not the UN, can disarm U.S. citizens, but the U.S. government and local governments and state can try to do this. And so we have to be ever vigilant about the actions of bureaucrats and elected officials here in the United States, as well as be mindful of what these international bodies are trying to do, because we do on occasion have U.S. government officials who want to take their lead from international law or to have the United States follow international law. And this, of course, is wrong, wrong, wrong.
It is wrong, and also the practical experience that we had also in Europe showed that the UN arms embargo on firearms in the whole region of the Balkans resulted in an underground network of politicians of the Balkans and other countries that actually use the UN's embargo to smuggle arms, which is something that shouldn't have happened, and these things do happen.
They do happen, and I think that the American people, in fact, everyone who's listening to this program, know very well that when there are laws in place that stop law-abiding citizens from engaging in activities, bad guys, evil people, they figure out how to get around these laws, whether they're politicians who are corrupt or whether they're just citizens who are corrupt. And what we need to do is have more transparency in the world. The UN would better serve the cause of freedom if they actually said, well, you know, what we're going to do is we're going to actually engage in a campaign to get everyone in the world to be able to own a firearm to protect themselves and their families and their property. Wouldn't that be a great turnaround?
It is that specific encroachment that I think someone who we all knew and have great respect for, and during his lifetime warned us about the encroachment of government and international institutions such as the UN, was none other than Milton Friedman. And we certainly remember that this week commemorates his 100th birthday and his centenary. So we would just like to briefly reflect on the message that Milton Friedman had from a perspective on the importance of free enterprise and the limits of government and the importance of limiting government and its control.
Well, I must say that Milton Friedman is, you know, just one of the most inspired intellectuals to provide leadership in our nation. And, of course, he follows in the tradition of Hayek and Adam Smith. And yet he really was a modern-day hero for many of us. He was an advisor to President Reagan. He was a leader in the movement to actually allow children and their families access to the best education possible for them. He talked about, he was pro-immigration, as many of us are, but he said if you have a welfare state, you will invite illegal activity. People will want to come to your country illegally and not through legal means. And, of course, in all these instances, he has been proven right time and time again.
Thank you very much indeed, Becky. We really appreciate your thoughts and your the feedback that you provided on some of these key issues of the day. And we look forward to continuing our discussions on some of these very important issues on the economy, on liberty and security that affect us as American citizens, our everyday lives. And thank you so much for your leadership in advancing liberty and in strengthening the rule of law and certainly communicating the importance of limited government.
Thank you, Joel and Natasha. And let me remind you that I would just love to be able to put into the hands of any of your listeners who contact you a pocket copy of the Constitution so they too can have immediate access to this amendment defending our rights to keep and bear arms.
Wonderful indeed.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Becky.
God bless you.